If there's one thing that I absolutely despise in life, it's being satisfied with something that I've purchased, which is why today I'm going to be talking about cut content in video games, because why would you ever just be happy with the game that you played when instead you could spend all of your time thinking about what could have been? Hello, good evening, I am Joseph Filmography, and jokes aside, cut content has always been one of the most fascinating parts of video games. People have loved behind-the-scenes looks into movies and TV for ages, and cut content in games is sort of just the next evolution of that, because instead of it being up to the creators to make behind-the-scenes footage available to all of us, anything that's just left in the game's code is now available for whoever can reach in there and yank it out. A great example in the interest in cut content is with Elden Ring. Elden Ring released last year to massive success, and there are entire channels on YouTube with millions of views dedicated solely to cut content within the game. From Software, who made Elden Ring, is probably one of the best places to look for cut content and unused content, because they seem to leave more of that stuff in the code than anybody else. But we'll get back to From Software later, because I have something really cool I want to talk about with them. But the reason I wanted to film this video is because the most interesting part of cut content to me has always been music. I know, shocker, the music guy is interested in the music, who'da thunk. But as I've been looking into unused music recently, I found some really interesting stuff that no one's really talked about, so I figured, hey, why not, you know? So buckle your seatbelts and I'll take us on a magical journey of discovery and learning and entertainment, I don't know. Now I am really excited for this, because obviously everyone knows Mario music. It's freaking Mario. And when I mention Mario music, you'll definitely have certain songs that pop into your mind even if you're not a big Mario fan. But my personal favorite Mario game is not one that people talk about very often, and luckily I was able to find some very interesting unused music within Super Mario 3D Land. For those who don't know, Super Mario 3D Land was the first smash hit on the Nintendo 3DS, but despite this, no one really talks about it anymore. So I wasn't expecting I'd get to talk about it here. But today, I have found something very interesting. For Super Mario 3D Land, we have two pieces of unused music, and the first one is much less interesting, but still worth talking about, I guess. In the E3 demo, there was a unique track for the level selection screen that never actually appears in the final game, and if you listen to it, you can see it. Well, I'll just let you take a listen. The thing about this is that it's so incredibly and wildly simplistic that you can't really pin down how this may have influenced any of the pieces in the final game, because it's literally as bare bones as a song could possibly get. But where I do think I've found a connection to this piece is not in 3D Land's sequel, but the re-release of it and the sort of Super Mario 3D Land 2.5 that is Bowser's Fury. You see, when you boot up this game on the Nintendo Switch, the first thing you'll see is a menu that might have a slightly familiar sounding tune. But okay, I know. That's kind of a stretch, not really anything of substance there. But where I do have something of substance is in the next piece, because the next unused track isn't from the Mario series at all. Despite appearing in this game, the next unused track is actually Kakariko Village from The Legend of Zelda. So what on earth could this mean? Well, there's a couple of things. The simple answer is simply that it was probably just a demo track to test out the game's sound before the actual music had been put in. It's very common for games to have demo tracks left in the game's files that were there just for testing audio levels or for filling space before they had actually put in the proper music. An Ocarina of Time 3D, where this track would come from, was the big seller on the 3DS at the time, so it makes perfect sense that a track from that game would be used as a demo in Super Mario 3D Land. Or at least it would if Super Mario 3D Land just had the track from Ocarina of Time and plopped into this game. But it's not that simple, because what we hear in Super Mario 3D Land's files is actually a completely unique arrangement of Kakariko Village that has never appeared in the Zelda franchise at all. So, okay, now we've got a more interesting question on our hands, because why on earth would they go to the trouble to completely rearrange the piece if it's never even gonna make it into the final game from the very beginning? And, well, the biggest answer I could come up with is, I don't think they did. See, when you're playing Super Mario 3D Land, you'll notice that one of the levels in the game is actually a Zelda reference in and of itself. The level's entire structure is built like a dungeon from a classic Legend of Zelda game, but it goes even further than that, because if you go to the back of the level, you'll see 4 torches that need to be lit up, and if you light each one with a fire flower, Zelda players will hear a very familiar sound. So okay, we have a Zelda reference in the game already, and there's an unused Zelda song in the beta files. So where does that leave us? When you bear in mind all of the Zelda material within the game itself, plus the fact that Ocarina of Time was the big seller of this console, what this leads me to believe is that originally there was going to be an entire level, not just as a subtle reference to, but directly from Ocarina of Time within this game. When you look at the layout of Ocarina of Time's Kakariko Village, it kind of could work as the same level structure that Super Mario 64 has, which is a much more interesting idea because once you start thinking about it that way, you realize Super Mario 3D Land may have originally had Mario 64 style open levels, and that's not even entirely irregular for the game itself. One of the most memorable levels in the game is the Desert Tower, a level where you're put in the desert and there is a big tower and you have to get to the top, and the game doesn't limit how you get to the top, it just says get there. There's several ways you can do it, and there's plenty of areas within the level you can run around and freely explore. And I'm willing to bet that originally, Kakariko Village was going to be the exact same thing. But, of course, we'll never know for sure, because at the end of the day, the piece was cut, and so this potential Kakariko Village level never ended up seeing the light of day. But regardless, it's fun to speculate. Now, Halo is another franchise that, once again, the music is very, very important to the soul and core of what that franchise is. You're gonna be seeing a lot of that in this video. But when I was looking at unused music for Halo, I found something really, really interesting, because most of the unused music I could find was just from the first game, Combat Evolved, and a lot of it was really kind of goofy. Which I thought was really funny, because Halo has a lot of music that you probably wouldn't immediately associate with this is the music for blowing aliens' brains out, but this is just kind of another level of silliness, you know? But what I really want to talk about is an unused piece from Halo titled The Love Theme. The thing that I find most interesting about this is that when you find this piece online, all of the comments immediately say that this would feel right at home in Halo Reach, which for those of you who don't know was Bungie's last Halo game, a prequel to this original Halo game. Which is a very interesting point, because Reach is sort of a swan song to everything Bungie had accomplished with Halo. It's a swan song to everything Halo was. It's sending it all out with a bang, just as Sergeant Johnson had requested. And so there are several things within the game that are sort of paying homage to Combat Evolved, and several ways to really bring the franchise back to its roots. So having a soundtrack that may have been inspired by this piece would feel perfectly right at home in Halo Reach. But the thing that's even more interesting about it is the fact that this doesn't end there, because this one unused track, you can hear influence of this all throughout the rest of the Halo franchise. This track is never used in Combat Evolved, and you don't really hear its influence in Combat Evolved much, but you can definitely hear bits and pieces of it when you get to Halo 2 and Halo 3. See, towards the end of this piece, it goes directly into the main melody of Ghosts of Reach, which is the Arbiter's theme from Halos 2 and 3. That music wasn't made specifically for Halo 2. It was unused ideas from Halo 1 that got used in the sequel. And this is an important lesson for us to pay attention to, because what Halo is teaching us is that even if our ideas may not make it into the first cut of whatever project we're doing, we can always hang on to them, and they can be very, very helpful later on. As I mentioned before, From Software is a company that loves leaving their cut content in the game for players to find, and Dark Souls 3 has a very interesting instance of this. It's not irregular that you'll find one or two unused songs still hidden in the game's code, but Dark Souls 3 has an absolutely absurd 12 unused songs that can still be found in the game's code. Now, some of these are kind of straightforward, where you'll have alternate versions of a boss theme, and you can tell that it's an alternate version because one of the phases will be exactly the same, only with minor bits and pieces tweaked. You can see examples of this with Dragon Slayer armor, or Dancer of the Boreal Valley, but there's two in particular that I really want to talk about. One is an unused version of the main theme for Dark Souls 3. Now, at first, I kind of just assumed, okay, this was originally going to play on the main menu, where the current Dark Souls 3 menu theme plays. Makes enough sense. But that isn't actually where it was supposed to play at all. See, people who are much more knowledgeable about data mining than I am have been able to deduce that this was originally going to be the final boss theme at a much earlier stage in the game's development, where instead of the final boss being the Red Knight, the soul of Cinder that it is in the final game, it was going to be Pontiff Sullivan, who you fight about halfway through Dark Souls 3. You see, the entire end of the game was originally going to be structured very differently, with you fighting Pontiff Sullivan in a dark version of the tutorial area, an area which you can actually go to in the final game, just fighting a different boss there instead. Regardless, I really like listening to this piece, and I honestly may prefer it over the version that we got in the final game. It's really tough to say though, because they're both so freaking good. But the one that's most interesting to me is this song right here. I'm gonna put all the letters and numbers up here, because I'm not gonna freaking memorize them. But this piece has caught my eye, because based off of its naming convention and some tags within the game, it can be deducted that this piece was meant to be used somewhere within Lothric Castle. For those of you who don't know, the entire game sort of focuses around Lothric Castle, with you starting on the outer wall, and then journeying out to the various lands in the world, and coming back to the top of the castle at the very end for the final act. And when you listen to this piece, there's really only one place that you could imagine it fitting, that being the fight with the twin princes at the very top of Lothric Castle. And And although I prefer the final version of the Twin Princes theme, and I absolutely see why this was cut, there's one thing about this piece that really catches my eye, because none of the motifs in this piece appear within the Twin Princes theme in the final game, but there is a motif here that appears elsewhere in the soundtrack. Not in Twin Princes, not anywhere in Lothric Castle, in fact. Take a listen to this. Now this fascinates me because, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a huge lore guy. Don't get me wrong, I've watched a bit of VaatiVidya, I've done my fair share of Dark Souls deep dives, but I'm not super knowledgeable on the lore. But what I do really love about Dark Souls is the spirit of it. And the spirit of this is really freaking cool, because what you have here is a motif that started its life as the opening of the Twin Princes fight. The Twin Princes being two characters who have a sworn duty to the flame and have chosen to deny it. So you hear this motif as quiet and reserved and somber, a bit eerie almost. And when you hear this in the final game, it's at the absolute peak, the climax of the Soul of Cinder's theme, the final boss fight, your final test before you can complete that duty that the Twin Princes denied. The Soul of Cinder is a place where you go when you are taking up what the Twin Princes chose not to do and doing it for them. You're finishing the fight that they never even started. Here you have one motif that on the one hand is used as this epic final test of your might, and on the other is a collapsing and sad, decrepit remnant of what could have been. And both of these uses perfectly mirror their respective bosses, with it fitting almost exactly to the story implications of each character. And it's fascinating that the only motif that appears in multiple boss themes in the game is from essentially two mortal enemies. One character who has denied his duty to the flame, and the final boss who is bound by it. At the end of the day, I can understand why this piece got replaced, but I can't help but wishing that at least that motif had made it into the final game, because there's just something poetic about the only two characters who share this musical identity being so closely tied together and yet directly opposing one another. Now, those of you with keen observation skills may have noticed that my shirt has strangely changed its color, and my hair is no longer weirdly asymmetrical. That's because it's a different day. When I filmed this the other day, I wasn't sure at all what I wanted to do with the conclusion yet, so I just skipped it. But we're here now. As previously mentioned, cut content is always fascinating because it's so nice getting a peek behind the curtain of the game development process, getting to see inside the mind of the artist a little bit, even beyond what they share publicly. And I hope I've been able to illustrate why cut music in particular is so incredibly interesting, and how many doors it can open. Be it learning about secret levels, or the creative process, or even story and lore implications within the game. And hey, there's plenty of fascinating unused music in other games that I never actually covered in this video. I wanted to talk about Zelda, I really freaking did, but it was gonna make this video so long. But hey, if you want to hear me talk about Zelda music in the future, I don't know, that subscribe button, it's looking pretty inviting. You can stay updated, maybe give the video a like or ring the bell. And that's all I've got. Let me know what your favorite unused music is in the comments. I don't know if you could tell, but I like learning about this stuff. Make sure to tune into the next one where we talk about caves.